Allen Lund Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
Solving big problems requires communication and collaboration, which is at the heart of what the Eastern Transportation Coalition does up and down the Eastern Seaboard. The coalition's freight program director, Marygrace Parker, joins the program to talk about how they're tackling the truck parking crisis one city, county, and state at a time. The Guaranteeing Overtime for Truckers Act is simple enough, but the waters are being muddied by groups with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Jamie Jones and Mark Schremer of Landline Magazine join a roundtable discussion with Scott Thompson. And finally, a slight bump of freight in the spot market has taken place. We speak with DAT to get the latest numbers in load volume and talk about how the holiday season is shaping up. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. We begin with breaking news at the U.S.-Canada border, where a vehicle explosion shut down 4 border crossings this afternoon. It happened at the Rainbow Bridge when a passenger vehicle crossing into New York from Canada blew up. Information obtained by Landline reveals that the vehicle was heading through a checkpoint when the driver was told to go to a secondary search. While attempting to evade that secondary search, explosives were set off inside the vehicle. Sources tell Landline that the incident is being investigated as a terrorist attack. The bridges closed include the Lewiston, Queenston, Rainbow, Whirlpool, and Peace bridges. Traffic is closed on both sides of the border. Updates on this developing story when we return next week. For updates throughout the holiday weekend, stay tuned to news outlets. The state of California and the Teamsters are on the same side of a fight against FMCSA's meal and rest break rules. In August, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration solicited petitions for waivers from its previous decisions to preempt meal and rest break rules in California and Washington, which exceed the amount of break time required by the hours of service regulations. Proponents of FMCSA's preemption argue that these state rules cause an unreasonable burden on interstate commerce. California and the Teamsters, however, said in their petition that the extra break time is beneficial to drivers with regard to both health and safety. They added there is no evidence that the rule has weakened the national supply chain. The meal and rest break rules for California and Washington generally require employers to provide employees with an off-duty 30-minute break for every 5 hours worked and a 10-minute off-duty break for every 4-hour period. The Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association filed comments with the agency about the decision to possibly reconsider preempting the rules. OOID wrote that California and Washington's meal and rest break laws are in part a reflection of how some motor carriers mistreat drivers through poor working conditions, non-competitive wages, and misclassification. OOIDA said the state's meal and rest break laws do not undermine highway safety, adding that any attempt to preempt the laws are attempts to unfairly exploit driver productivity. The Federal Highway Administration is fighting inflation like the rest of us. The agency reports that the cost of highway construction projects rose to an all-time high in the first quarter of this year, up nearly 3% compared to the previous quarter. Over 10 quarters dating back to the end of 2020, highway construction costs spiked more than 53% leading into April of this year. Driving up prices the most, higher price points for concrete and asphalt and increased labor costs. That provides less bang for the buck as the Federal Highway Administration works to make best use of funding through the infrastructure law. Expect a lot of company on the roads this weekend. AAA says this will be the busiest Thanksgiving travel period in several years. More than 55 million people are expected to travel somewhere, more than 49 million by car, between Wednesday and Sunday. That ranks it the third busiest Thanksgiving travel period in the more than 2 decades AAA has tracked it. The worst time to be on the road this week, AAA says it's already passed. It was Wednesday afternoon when traffic was expected to be 80% higher than normal in some areas. The best times to travel coming up, Sunday morning. Mountain express lanes on Interstate 70 are going to be open more often this holiday season. The Colorado DOT made the move following a request by Governor Jared Polis, who said the move would ease the burden on travelers by easing traffic. The Mountain Express lanes are not as wide as regular lanes you see on a highway, which is why they can only be opened a limited number of days per year under an agreement with the Federal Highway Administration. The rest of the year, the lanes are used as shoulders for breakdowns. It's important to note that vehicles with 3 or more axles, including commercial trucks, cannot use the Mountain Express lanes in Colorado, but additional passenger vehicles using them should mean less congestion for everyone. A frequently used freight route in West Texas could be getting a new name, opening the door for federal funding. The House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee approved the bipartisan I-27 Numbering Act of 2023 last week. The bill seeks to name a stretch of roadway currently known as the Ports to Plains Corridor from the U.S.-Mexico border in Laredo as Interstate Route 27. The corridor is vital to the energy and agriculture industries. The bill now heads to the House floor for consideration. There's also a companion bill in the Senate. The state of Iowa has extended its emergency for 6 counties in response to a bird flu outbreak. The disaster proclamation will remain in effect through December 17th if it's not extended again. Hours of service and certain weight requirements for commercial drivers hauling loads related to this disaster will continue to be suspended for the duration of it. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reports as of November 20th that nearly 1,000 flocks totaling close to 64 million birds across 47 states have been affected by bird flu. Driving through Tennessee this holiday weekend, mind your P's and Q's. Law enforcement agencies throughout the state are teaming up for something called the Tennessee Interstate Challenge. The Highway Patrol is leading the enforcement blitz. Troopers will be placed every 10 to 20 miles on Tennessee interstates, keeping a lookout for dangerous driving behaviors. The Highway Patrol is encouraging sheriff's offices and local police departments to take part as well. The campaign starts the day after Thanksgiving and runs all weekend long. A truck driver is facing possible charges in Pennsylvania after severely damaging a covered bridge. It happened in West Earl Township earlier this week. Police there told WGAL News that the 50-year-old driver tried crossing the Bitzer's Mill covered bridge and got stuck inside. That caused some damage. Then the driver tried reversing out of the jam and did even more damage. Bitzer's Bridge, which dates back to the 1840s and is believed to be the oldest covered bridge in Lancaster County, has a height restriction of 10 feet 6 inches. It'll stay closed until the necessary repairs are made. We have yet another acquisition to tell you about. STG Logistics says it has completed its acquisition of Best Dedicated Solutions. Terms of the deal, first announced in June, have not been disclosed. STG specializes in supply chain solutions. The acquisition of Best Dedicated Solutions adds expedited dry van, temperature control, and flatbed services to its portfolio. And finally, a bizarre story out of Virginia. The sheriff's office in Stafford County say they've arrested a man they accuse of stealing more than 200 side mirrors from commercial trucks. Deputies say the crime spree dates back 3 years, with dozens of reports of side mirrors being stolen off unoccupied tractors. The case was cold until a truck driver last week reported a side mirror stolen, only he had placed an Apple AirTag tracking device on the mirror beforehand. Deputies used that to track down the house where the mirror was taken, got a search warrant, and this week recovered more than 200 side mirrors from inside. The sheriff's office says the suspect had even used stickers to catalog when and where the mirrors were taken. The 27-year-old suspect has been charged with 2 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of tampering with a vehicle, and at last check was being held without bond. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Next, we'll discuss truck parking with Marygrace Parker of the Eastern Transportation Coalition. Jamie Jones and Mark Schremer of Landline Magazine join Scott Thompson to discuss the latest on the Got Truckers Act. And Ashley Blackford speaks with Robert Rouse of DAT to get the latest numbers in load volume and talk about how the holiday season is shaping up. We'll be back in just a moment with more of the show. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Today's rising costs affect everyone. Replace your harmonic damper with a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper to prevent costly repairs and downtime. Keep your money in your pocket and your truck on the road with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off TruckStop Loadboard Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Loadboard Pro.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Landline now, welcome back. The truck parking problem is a problem pretty much anywhere you look. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but it's especially bad up and down the Eastern Seaboard, and that just so happens to be the focus of our next guest. Marygrace Parker is a director of the freight program for the Eastern Transportation Coalition, and she joins us now to not just talk about truck parking, but other issues on the coalition's radar as well. Marygrace, thanks so much for being on the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
I want to start with, I think, kind of a basic introduction might be helpful of sorts about your coalition. There may be some people out there who remember the I-95 Corridor Coalition, and I believe that's you. New name, same goals. Tell us again, for people who may not be familiar, what your group does.
So the Eastern Transportation Coalition is a consortium of 18 state DOTs in the District of Columbia. Up and down the East Coast, we now include Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, thus our name change from I-95. Our focus has always been more larger than I-95, but it's really about how we can look as a coalition across this region to work on issues that transcend jurisdictional lines, try to work on consistent messages, interoperability. So between our state DOTs and our associated transportation agencies, whether it be motor vehicle, port authorities, toll authorities, law enforcement, to really try to get people to think on a broader basis, especially given how many car and even truck trips transcend multiple states on a daily basis in this quarter.
Yeah, and that certainly opens you up to a number of issues that you can try and tackle when you talk about an area that's big. You meet pretty frequently to talk about these issues you're dealing with, and I know a frequent topic that you bring up a lot, and we're going to talk about it here a little bit, is truck parking, as I mentioned earlier. You, as a coalition, cannot build truck parking facilities, but as you kind of alluded to there, you can help the process along through communication and outreach and things like that. What does that look like, the outreach that you're doing right now with regard to truck parking and what you're trying to accomplish?
So one of the things we do, there's obviously a lot of things going around nationally, including the work of the National Coalition on Truck Parking led by USDOT. We sort of break things down a little bit. We've got some more unique issues in our region. It's a lot more challenging to even look for places to build, a lot of competition for space, land use costs. So really trying to think about, as we gather our states together, we have a quarterly working group meeting of our public agencies within our quarter, and we talk about, what are you doing? How are you looking at this? And we certainly recognize there's a lot of studies going on. There's value in sharing between states, how they've managed to use data to maybe target better where some of their locations might be in the future, instead of just building on, where we picked a rest area or an off-site private place 50 years ago. So really kind of sharing some of that sort of research study work in a way that maybe helps jumpstart some of the activities and move that along. But we all recognize that the focus needs to be on capacity building. When you think about capacity, where are you going to build these? How do you do that? Where do you get the land use issues? So starting to talk about, are we looking at the state and local level about what kind of land use zoning needs to happen to make it more hospitable, to have expanded truck parking built in areas, to be not considered a nuisance. But the other part of that is, and I think this is key, is let's think beyond that grant money, long-term O&M. I live in a state, there's other ones that at times we've had to close facilities because of operating costs once that grant money is gone. Let's have these conversations in conjunction with capacity. How are we going to run them in the long run? So how do you build that into long-term funding on the public agency side, on the private sector side? When people talk to us about public-private partnerships, I use the example, if you're going to build a parking garage, you have a plan for how you're going to pay for it. How are we thinking about long-term? And I'm not opposed to the idea. I know there's discussions about reserved parking. But that brings us down to, do we really understand the trucking industry to say, is that realistic for every driver to think about having to pay for parking? What's that translate into driver compensation? How does it transfer into driver choice making? So can we really not just sugarcoat things? Let's just build more capacity, but let's talk about what's going to happen when we do that to make sure that we don't build them to close them. So again, it goes to how do we become a good labor with land use? So we get our states talking, and then we use examples every quarterly meeting. We have a spotlight. Our colleagues down in Florida are doing some really good work on how they're expanding capacity, having conversations with their localities. And so we're sharing that so other states can learn from that and maybe help them jumpstart along as they get some funding to move forward and do some capacity work.
Yeah, and just hearing you speak there, I think part of the beauty of your coalition is that it is kind of speaking with one voice and bringing all of these groups together. There are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and I think, at least from my perspective, and you've been at this longer than I have, and maybe you can bring some perspective with this, but it does seem like states and local governments are understanding this problem a bit better in terms of there being a truck parking shortage and in terms of what that means for the general public and the supply chain, and we can obviously go on and on with that. Do you see more awareness out there? Do you think states and, again, these local governments are understanding the issue better? And if so, is that bringing us closer to hopefully a solution here?
I think it is. I think there's a lot more understanding. I'm proud of the work we're doing, as many other organizations are. Federal Highway's done some great work putting some guidance documents out, about how you think about truck parking in local areas, and we push those messages. And I've seen some examples. So, recently in one of our programs, we have a training program. We take some folks out. We were in Lehigh Valley. They're having some major conversations out there about, with all their warehouse growth, where they put in truck parking. But just from some of those stakeholder discussions, we looked at a facility that was about to be leased that was brand new. And one of the things the company did, based on a lot of those regional discussions, it's a business decision and I think a good neighbor decision, is actually added extra space for trucks coming in to park and stay a while, use the facility. So I think it's not just building the awareness from the public sector side, but it's also the public and even the people that are engaged in some of this commercial activity that is part of the supply chain and that truckers have to interact with. So we think this is one of those problems that everybody has a role and a responsibility in working to solve.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I said this recently to somebody else, but we've got all these studies going on. We've got these conversations. We've got awareness, I think, raising, which is these are all positive things. But I keep waiting and keep looking for the action on a larger scale. And you mentioned the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act earlier. Hopefully that gets passed and signed into law. That would obviously help in a great number of areas. But I keep waiting for the action and I keep looking for it. And it seems like your coalition is pushing that along in the right direction. And from hearing you speak, it does seem like there is some optimism there for something happening. And we'll obviously keep an eye on that and hope that it does. But you feel pretty confident that we are going to start seeing these sites popping up more and more, it sounds like, over the coming months and years.
Yeah, I see a number of states moving forward. I mean, Federal Highway, again, has done, and Motor Carrier has done some good work highlighting some of the existing funding, and we've shared that with our states that's available now. We don't have to wait for all of that other money to come, and there's some states that have grabbed on to those grants. At our last quarterly meeting, we had we called it Ask the Industry, Ask the Driver about truck parking, and we had Louis Pugh from OIDA and also an ETA road team driver, and they talked very candidly about the challenges, and their message was very clear. It's great to have real-time information systems out there, but you can't just tell me there's zero spaces. We need to get building, and that was a real clear message. And again, pushing that idea that there's existing money out there, go after it, get going, do some capacity building. If it doesn't have to be the largest project to solve, 200 spaces, add what you can where you can, but also reminding people that with those spaces, we need to have some good basic amenities. My executive director always says the truck is the office of these drivers. We need to have hospitable locations for them when they arrive, with some good basic amenities that anybody wants to have when they're resting. So that's another part of the message that I think we're hearing is, it's great to pave over something and add some spaces, but let's also think about there needs to be good amenities, at least decent bathrooms, certainly lighting for safety issues. So I think pushing that along and getting that message that you can take some steps are incremental maybe, but they're valuable at every step of the way to drivers.
Yeah, room for optimism there for sure. Truck parking, I mentioned earlier, just one of many issues your coalition is tackling. What else is at the top of your list right now in terms of priorities, aside from truck parking?
So the other thing we're really working on, we have a lot of agencies. Obviously, our DOTs are operating agencies. We just recently had a traveler information sharing summit with our states that put out, that information that you see during weather events, disruptions. And it was really focused on how do you talk to commercial drivers. Our tagline is trucks are not big cars. So building this awareness among the transportation systems management and operation people that the kind of messaging that you put out for trucks, let's say you're going to have a major closure, how quickly can you let them know when that's planned? So the decision wheel for a driver, a truck, on where they can get off is different than maybe you and I are passionate to. So what we're doing is we're talking about this idea of improving information really targeted at trucks. Where do we get this information out? Do we change some of those locations with our message boards because where a truck may need to get off might be sooner than a car? Do we get this information out to neighboring states so that a truck decides to find that parking space before they come into a state that's got some major closures or restrictions to weather events? So really trying to up the ante on how we talk to trucks, recognizing they get their information differently and they have different decisions they can make when they're reacting to closures, construction, and those type of activities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, the underlying message, I think, in all of this is communication, collaboration, and you're certainly leading the way there on that. Real quick, too, I wanted to ask you, we've got about a minute left here, but the Freight Academy program, that kind of plays into this whole idea of this being a team effort. Can you just talk to us a little bit about what that program does and what its goals are?
So really quickly, we bring in about 35 to 38 people from all over the corridor, planning, operations, policy. We put them through what I'll call a 6-day boot camp, exposing them to all freight aspects from the private sector side so they understand how more quickly those decisions have to be made, more quickly in terms of how they have to make, what kind of things factor into transportation, logistics decisions. And one of them, again, was to bring in a truck panel, Louis Pugh being one of them, and hear candidly about the operating world of the industry, the freight industry. It's great to read stuff, but hearing people that are telling you every day how they use the transportation system from the private sector side. So it's a big boot camp of 6 days. We get them nice and tired, but they leave there with a much greater awareness from the other side of the world of how they need to think about freight.
Yeah, as I said earlier, I think this increase in communication we're seeing and awareness really is a positive thing, and it's going to bring about positive changes. And you and your coalition are certainly leading the way, as I said, out there on that. So we thank you for that. And Marygrace, we thank you for your time today. We really appreciate talking to you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate what you do. Have a great day.
Our thanks to Marygrace Parker of the Eastern Transportation Coalition. You can check them out at tetcoalition.org. We've got to take a quick break, but don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. We have been bombarded with news stories over the past couple weeks, as often happens when the holidays are fast approaching. So we thought it a good idea to take a step back and take note of the biggest stories that dropped and add some context and analysis. And if you're looking for context and you're looking for analysis, you'd be hard-pressed to find two people who do it better. Jamie Jones, Mark Schirmer, both here from Landline Magazine.
Kind. Can I do a victory lap around the studio now? I feel like
after we finish here, you're more than welcome to take as many laps as you want.
Can you add that to my annual review?
I'd be happy to. I will vouch for you for sure. Let's start with these two new bills in the House and the Senate. We've talked about these quite a bit, but it's worth, again, I think, talking more about them and adding some context here. We're talking the overtime pay for truck drivers, the other name for it, the Guaranteed Overtime for Truckers, or Got Truckers Act. Mark, you've been covering this quite a bit. Just real quick here off the bat, a brief explanation for people out there who maybe weren't following this when the news dropped.
So the Fair Labor Standards Act, all the way back in 1938, includes a motor carrier exemption, which basically means that motor carriers do not have to pay truck drivers overtime compensation. And what is the irony of all of this goes back into the reason that they did that at that time is they did not want to encourage truck drivers working, a lot of hours over 40 hours a week.
They tried to discourage overtime by doing this. That was the whole point, was not to.
So you didn't want a bunch of truck drivers out there working 60, 70-hour weeks in effort to get overtime pay. But you know what has happened? I think
what has changed in 85 years, Mark?
We're not obviously not telling the truck drivers out there anything that they don't know.
Yeah.
But many of them that are listening right now are working 60, 70 hours a week, and they are not getting that extra compensation that pretty much everybody else does in every other occupation around the United States. If they're waiting at a receiver facility, all those people that are supposed to be unloading the truck are subject to overtime pay. But them sitting there in the truck are not, and obviously
or pay for that
or
matter.
paid at all because of most truck drivers are paid by the mile. So what this bill simply does would remove that exemption, and so company drivers would now be subject to receiving overtime pay.
And in talking, we've talked about this before, but in talking with OOIDA. They talked about that in that it would benefit company drivers, but it would in turn benefit everybody on down the line because, the analogy of a rising tide lifts all ships, this kind of thing. When you look at this, and we talked to Representative Jeff Van Drew about this, but when you talk about this and you look at it in terms of fairness and you look at it under the fact that it hasn't changed in 85 years when so many other things have, it just makes sense that this would be something that is going to help people. We'll see where this goes, but there is some pushback out there, and I'm not sure the arguments hold weight. I'm biased, I will admit. But Jamie, I know you've looked at them as well. These arguments against, what do you make of them?
Again, not shocking probably to any of our listeners, the American Trucking Associations is pushing back hard on this, and to the point that their president, Chris Spears, has done it. They have a lobbyist who's on the Women of Trucking Advisory Board who is pushing back on it. They're being very, very vocal about this. And, let's just get down to brass tacks. Their motivation is their motor carrier members' company bottom lines.
Yep.
They're all about the profit. They're not about investing in the drivers who are making them that profit. And that's what it all boils down to. And I just, the gall that they have to publicly say the things that they have, and but driver wages have gone up. Oh boy, howdy, did I get fired up on that one. I started looking back, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics has, I look specifically at the long haul trucking segment. I was getting really narrow in what I was looking at, but their data goes back to 2019. And after that, it gets messy and archival and all that. Well, I looked at the pay year to year over 3 to 4 years, and I speculated out 2023 because we don't have a full year worth of data yet. But if you factor in inflation, and I think everybody is very familiar with what kind of inflation we have faced over the past 12 months or better. Groceries alone are very telling on that one. So when you look at that and you start adjusting pay 2019, what truckers made in 2019, and you adjust it for inflation in 2023, you're making roughly $500 more than you did 4 years ago. And, I mean, that's not even over the course of 12 months. Good luck.
Nothing. Yeah.
I mean, you're going to lose that in the laundry. Inevitably, it's just, it's just. So ATA's argument that they're paying more, that driver wages are at record highs and blah, 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 blah. Whatever. You're working 60, 70 hours as a company driver, and there are kids at burger joints flipping burgers making the same thing per hour if you break it out, and they're working 40 hours and going home to party with their friends, every night.
And the thing is, too, ATA will tell everybody that there's this supposed driver shortage out there. And if there really was a driver shortage, wouldn't they also be everything they could to increase those wages, to attract drivers to the industry, to keep them, to retain them? Wouldn't that be a big part of it to solve this supposed problem that's out there, that there's not enough drivers, according to them? But this tells you, to me, their attitude and stance toward this is another point that there isn't a driver shortage as well.
Oh, 100%. I mean, you can't, this is not purely a supply and demand issue when it comes to truck drivers. This is an employment competition. All right. You have to have a job that compels people wage-wise, benefit-wise, all these intangibles of home time, being treated like a decent human being, all of those things. You have to package that up and go out there in the job market and compete against employers who are right now whipping the thunder out of these mega fleets when it comes to, attractive jobs.
Well, and imagine any other industry, too, where you tell somebody they're going to work 70 hours a week, but, hey, I'm only going to pay you for 40 of those hours. I mean, you just don't see it anywhere else.
Oh, and you're not even getting paid by the hour. We're going to pay you by the mile, and then we're going to sit you at a dock for 4 to 6 hours before you can ever even start earning that money.
Yeah, it's something that...
Ooh, sounds awesome.
Sign me up. Yeah, exactly. It's something Congressman Van Drew told us. Pay people what they're worth.
Oh, 100%.
What they're doing.
And and I think I brought this up in one of my stories, and it was a couple of years ago now, but a safety advocate was testifying in front of Congress about how she was on a ride along with a driver, and they were waiting at a shipper receiver facility, and she recognized at that moment she was getting paid and the driver wasn't.
Yeah, and I do want to throw the footnote out there that, hey, there are very good motor carriers. There are motor carriers who are, they're paying detention time. They're paying, an extra wage for having to stay in the truck while you're away from home. They're doing it right. They're also the ones that aren't hurting for drivers. So saying that we're going to pay overtime, they may have to adjust how they do things a little bit to have actual overtime. But in reality, it's just going to be moving some decimals around on paper. But, bottom line, the really good motor carriers are already basically doing this. It's just a matter of how is it packaged.
2 quick notes on this. fightingfortruckers.com. If you want to
Shameless
encourage
plug.
your
Do it.
lawmakers to sign on to this bill, do that. And then check out John Bindle's piece on landline.media. He's got a great opinion piece on this issue
100%.
that tackles a lot of people and a
Tell
lot
them
of
the
issues.
headline. It's easier to search by the headline.
Yeah, Overtime Bill for Truckers Gets It Right is the title of that. So go check that out. We've only got a few minutes left. I do want to talk about underride guards. This talk of a mandate. We've got this advisory committee that held its second meeting recently to talk about the issue. I listened to a good portion of it. You did as well, Mark. A lot of takeaways from this, a lot of people stating their cases. But what kind of stood out to you from that second meeting there?
Well, I think a big part of it was the operational concerns that were kind of highlighted. Obviously, everybody involved wants fewer crashes, wants fewer fatalities out on the roadways, and there are several members on this committee that lost loved ones, and obviously our heart goes out to them,
100%.
our deepest sympathies. But I think some of the parts that were brought up is, okay, you want to do this, but we need to look at what are the unintended consequences if we add this in? What other safety concerns can arise? I mean, you have you put this on with trucks trying to go over railroad tracks, all getting high centered, all those type of things. That you can see some of these studies that look at an individual car. Okay, that it stops them from going underneath, but what is the bounce back, or what happens actually out on the road with other cars that are also going 70 miles an hour on the highway? Does it end up causing a worse crash? It's all of these things that have to be kind of looked at, and so it's a really tough issue. And like I said, my heart completely goes out to anybody who's had anything involved in these types of crashes. But it's just having to look at what is the best way and what is going to be the most safe way to help everybody out on the roadways.
And that it's always challenging, because we do line up with safety groups. I mean, they're actually, backing on the overtime pay.
Yeah.
I mean, there's times that we align. So, and that's always good, but it's so tough when it's an emotional.
Sure, and you understand where those people are coming from.
Yeah,
completely.
Absolutely.
But I felt like Doug Smith, one of OOIDA's board of directors, who is on the underride committee, his presentation's phenomenal. I mean, I could sit and listen to Doug talk all day long anyway. But when he said, I'm the only one sitting here on this committee who's been high-centered on a railroad track. And there's two ways you're getting off of that, a tow truck or a train.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I know this. I mean, we've written about this. We research this all the time.
But saying it that way really puts it into perspective, yeah.
Wow. And then you're high-centered, waiting on the tow truck, hoping the train doesn't come along. I mean, it was just all of that, and thinking about how many of those that we've covered over the years. I feel like we got to put some hard numbers to this and start looking at it, from a very analytical standpoint, even more so than we have at this point. And it's a little disappointing on this particular committee to know that the number of safety groups represented on there outnumbers.
I was just going to say that.
The people who are going to be regulated and put in these unsafe scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, Doug's the only driver on the committee, and like he said, he's the only one that knows the horror and fear of being stuck on one of those railroad tracks.
And we're certainly marching toward this. It feels like this is where we're headed here with a mandate. Given that, notion, you would like to hear more people who it is going to affect directly, the practicality aspect of this, the cost aspect of this. These are all things that they're going to have to take into consideration as they put this into effect, if they indeed do, and it looks like they are going to at some point, or want to at least. But yeah, your point exactly. Hear from the people that it's going to affect down the road here, and we'll see where this all leads. But we only got to 2 issues. We had a lot actually to talk about, but we'll get to that next time. Jamie, Mark, a pleasure as always. We'll see you on the other side.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
Take care.
Our thanks to Jamie Jones and Mark Schrimmer. Check out their outstanding work every day on landline.media and in every issue of Landline magazine. We're staring down a break, but stick around. Landline Now is back right after this.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. There are a number of critical questions you need to answer in order to run a successful trucking business. Among the most important of those questions are, where's the freight going to be and how much is it going to pay? Today, Landline Now senior correspondent Ashley Blackford will bring us answers to both of those important questions with a look at this week's freight markets with the folks from DAT. Here's Ashley now with the report.
Thanks, Mark, and hello once again to Robert Rouse with DAT. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing great, Ashley. Thanks for asking.
How has the spot market performed during the holiday season so far?
Yeah, so far that holiday season's been kind of up and down. Last week, we saw just over about a 4.2% increase in total load volume to just under 1.055 million loads. This was a slight bump back up in freight, which was good to see. During the week of Thanksgiving, we typically see less freight volume as a lot of shippers are taking some extended time off, usually about a 4-day weekend. So we expect this week to be pretty light. So momentary bump back down and then hopefully a bump back up after that. When we look at the number of trucks on the DAT load board, they decreased by about 7.9%, down to 390,000 trucks last week. That's exactly what we'd probably expect at this time of year. When we look at the overall strength of the spot market last week, we saw load to truck ratios increase slightly across all three equipment types. Even though we had less loads than normal this time of year, we saw the volume of trucks drop even more, creating a stronger ratio. When we look at this week's reefer load to truck ratio, load post volume actually increased by about 5% week over week, and that was boosted by Christmas trees and food shipments ahead of Thanksgiving. Nonetheless, reefer load post and the spot market volume were around 37% lower than last year and about 45% lower than the pre-pandemic average for week 46. When we look at the carrier equipment posts, they were also down about 2% week over week, but that resulted in last week's reefer load to truck ratio increasing slightly to 3.40. That's still the lowest reefer load to truck ratio in the last 7 years, so something we're definitely watching. Lastly, when we look at the national benchmark broker to carrier spot rates without fuel, they increased again for reefers by about 2 cents per mile, up to $1.97 per mile last week. While van stayed flat for the third week in a row at $1.57, potentially we're getting to the bottom of the van rates there. Flatbed line haul rates lost more ground following last week's penny per mile week over week decrease to $1.86 per mile. We continue to see the price of diesel go down, though, week over week, with the national average dropping another 8 cents per gallon last week. So at $4.21 per gallon, we are now at the lowest weekly price since the first week of August. So that's definitely something that hopefully will be helping drivers out there. For the Thanksgiving week, a lot of big carriers are trying to shorten the radius of operation for their trucks to get their drivers home for Thanksgiving. So capacity naturally tightens during this time on the contract side as they juggle the different schedules. So this is a tough week to cover freight usually. So as owner-operators on the spot market, you can use that to your advantage when you're negotiating rates out there.
Now, Houston is considering a plan that would limit where tractor trailers can travel as they move through the city. What are the consequences of such a plan?
Yeah, it's a great question. Houston is a major market for both vans and flatbeds. The top 5 flatbed lanes by load post volume all originate from Houston, Texas. For vans, Fort Worth to Houston and Houston to Dallas are 2 of the top load volume lanes in the entire country. That means any meaningful change to Houston will have a larger impact on these specific movements. That said, many major U.S. cities already have and limit the movement of tractor trailers because of traffic congestion, including some of the top 5 markets. For example, tractor trailers are banned inside I-285, the perimeter highway around Atlanta, unless they're making local pickups or deliveries. So what Houston is doing is not really new. However, if some version of the plan is enacted, Houston would be the largest city in the U.S. to enact a broad truck route plan. In addition to congestion, Houston officials have noted that trucks have been created traffic safety hazards, roadway damage, and reduced quality of life in neighborhoods. But let's face the facts. Trucks are essentially essential to commerce in the United States, but many don't like them when they are too close. It's what we call the NIMBY effect, not in my backyard. The effort in Houston and other cities as well is being driven in part by Vision Zero, which is the initiative of the Federal Highway Administration. It's aimed at eliminating all traffic fatalities and severe injuries while increasing safety on roadways. While all of us would support those goals for sure, how they are carried out is where things get a little sticky. The plan under the consideration in Houston would affect all commercial vehicles with a gross weight of 26,000 pounds or more. And there would be 3 types of roads under the plan. Through truck routes. These are the city's primary commercial vehicle routes, including interstates, state highways, toll roads, critical urban freight corridors, and roadways that are functional and suitable for truck traffic. They would also have local truck routes. These are defined as major thoroughfares that provide direct access to local origin and destinations. It can also serve as alternate truck routes. And then there'll be no through truck streets. These are defined as roads in which through truck traffic is prohibited, but can be used for local truck traffic, those kind of things. Again, these proposed restrictions are similar to those in effect in many other cities like Atlanta. If passed, they would not even go into effect until the springtime at the earliest. So definitely something to watch for if you are going to be operating in and out of the Houston market over the next couple of months.
Now, with Thanksgiving tomorrow and the holiday season rapidly following, how does the incident of freight cargo theft change, and what measures should owner-operators implement to mitigate the increased risks of theft during this time of year?
Yeah, that's a really important piece of the puzzle. While there's always a risk of cargo theft, it goes way up during the holiday season. Thieves hope to take advantage of drivers not being as diligent during this time. Food and beverage shippers are primary targets for cargo theft, especially at this time of year. Even if drivers are taking some time off this week, cargo theft is a big threat until the end of the new year. That's usually when we see it start to go back down. So the next couple of months are going to be crucial for all drivers out on the road. The first thing to remember is that cargo at rest is cargo at risk. The biggest dangers are going to be when you stop for your mandatory rest breaks. So a couple of key tips that lots of drivers have told me over the years is be aware of the hotspots. States like California, Illinois, and Georgia are all major hotspots for cargo theft. But that's just to name a few. A couple big companies have also told me they've got lots of stuff stolen right outside of Memphis recently. So just be very aware of the areas that you're going to. Park safely seems like a no-brainer, but choosing parking spots in well-lit areas with security cameras and position the truck in a way that makes cargo harder to access, like the rear doors against a wall or against another truck. Those types of things can be helpful. Be aware of any cars or people that don't seem like they belong in the area. A lot of thieves will stake out trucks if they see the drivers have left the area and wait to see if they're coming back before they put their plan into action. Stay vigilant through the entire time, paying attention to your surroundings, noting suspicious activities, and taking preventative actions such as moving the truck to a different area that's maybe more well lit can deter theft. If a vehicle seems to be following you, changing your route and contacting police is advisable. So if you get off, if you've noticed the same car doing the same thing, going a different way, see if they continue to follow you. Those are definitely important to be looking out for. And last is regular check-ins. Regularly checking in with your broker, shipper, or family lets others know your whereabouts, which is particularly important when carrying high-risk cargo. So having a plan so that way in case something happens to your truck, you can make sure to communicate that quickly.
All right, Robert, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ashley.
That was Robert Rouse with DAT. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Ashley. That's our program for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
Chrome.
And I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit ooida.com.